She had the perfect life, the perfect job, and the perfect relationship, until she realized none of it was actually hers. Lisa had always been the kind of person who made everything look easy. At 34, she lived in a beautiful apartment where every book stood perfectly straight on the shelf, and every throw pillow had its exact place. Her friends often joked that her home looked like a magazine spread, and honestly, that's exactly what Lisa wanted to hear. Every morning started the same way. Her alarm went off at exactly 6:30, not 6:29, not 6:31. She had this down to a science. Coffee first, always from the same blue mug. Then she'd check her phone, scrolling through emails while her breakfast toast was browning to the perfect shade of golden. Her work clothes were already laid out from the night before, pressed and ready. Lisa worked at one of those fancy marketing companies in the heart of downtown. The kind of place where everyone dressed sharp and talked about big deals over expensive coffee. She was really good at her job too. Her presentations were flawless. Her reports always came in early, and her boss trusted her with the biggest clients. Other people in the office looked up to her, wondering how she managed to stay so calm and collected all the time. But here's the thing about looking perfect from the outside. It takes a lot of work to keep up that image, and Lisa was starting to feel the cracks. Take her relationship with Michael, for example. They'd been together for almost 4 years now. On paper, they were the perfect couple. Both successful, both attractive, both the kind of people who looked great in holiday photos. They had dinner reservations at nice restaurants, took trips to places that looked amazing on social media, and everyone always commented on how lucky they were to have found each other. The problem was, somewhere along the way, their relationship had started to feel more like a business partnership than anything romantic. They had schedules for everything. Date nights were penciled in between work meetings. Even their conversations had become predictable, mostly about work, weekend plans, or what Netflix show they should watch next. Lisa couldn't remember the last time Michael had surprised her, or when they'd had one of those long, deep conversations that lasted until 3 in the morning. Everything felt safe, comfortable, but also kind of empty, if she was being honest with herself. And that's where the problems really started. Lisa wasn't used to being honest with herself. She'd gotten so good at managing her image, at being the person everyone expected her to be, that she'd almost forgotten who she actually was underneath all of that. Sleep became her first enemy. Every night she'd lie in bed with her mind racing. Did she send that email? Was tomorrow's presentation ready? What if the client didn't like her ideas? She'd check her phone, make mental notes, sometimes even get up to jot down things she couldn't forget. 3 hours of sleep became normal. 4 hours felt like a luxury. Her coworkers started noticing little changes. Lisa, who never used to make mistakes, had sent an email to the wrong client last week. She'd forgotten about a meeting and had to reschedule at the last minute. These weren't huge problems, but for someone like Lisa, who prided herself on never messing up, they felt enormous. The worst part was how she dealt with stress. Instead of slowing down or asking for help, Lisa doubled down on her perfectionism. If one color-coded calendar wasn't enough, she'd make 2. If organizing her closet by color and season once a month was good, doing it every week would be better. She started arriving at work earlier and staying later, trying to control every tiny detail of every project. Michael noticed too, but in his typical way, he tried to fix it with logic. "You're working too hard," he'd say, usually while scrolling through his own phone. "Maybe you should take a vacation." But the idea of taking time off just made Lisa more anxious. What if something went wrong while she was gone? What if someone else took over her projects and did a better job? The truth was, Lisa had built her whole identity around being the reliable one, the successful one, the one who had everything figured out. The thought of anyone seeing her struggle, seeing her as anything less than perfectly put together, felt impossible. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Lisa was in back-to-back meetings all day. Her phone buzzed during her lunch break, showing a number she hadn't seen in months. It was her younger sister calling from back home in Oregon. They hadn't talked much lately. Actually, they hadn't talked much in years. Lisa had left home for college and never really looked back. She visited for major holidays, sent birthday cards, and kept in touch through brief phone calls every few months. It wasn't that they didn't love each other. It was just that Lisa's life had moved in such a different direction. But this call was different. Her sister's voice sounded strained, tired in a way that immediately put Lisa on edge. The conversation was short but heavy. There were things happening at home, family situations that Lisa hadn't been fully aware of. Problems that had been building while she was busy building her career 3 states away. And then came the news that hit her like a truck. Their mom was getting worse. The forgetfulness that they'd all joked about, the little moments of confusion that seemed normal for someone in their 60s, weren't so harmless after all. The doctors had finally put a name to it, and it wasn't the kind of news you could fix with positive thinking or better organization. As Lisa sat in her pristine office, surrounded by awards and perfectly organized files, she realized that while she'd been busy making her life look perfect, real life had been happening without her. The people who mattered most had been dealing with real problems while she was stressed about presentation slides and client meetings. For the first time in years, Lisa's carefully maintained world felt very small and very fragile. 3 weeks later, Lisa found herself driving down Highway 5 toward home. She hadn't been back to Oregon in almost 2 years, and every mile felt like traveling backward through time. The familiar green hills and small towns brought back memories she'd carefully packed away when she moved to the city. Her company had been surprisingly understanding when she'd asked for time off. Family emergency, she'd told her boss, which wasn't exactly a lie. Her sister had called twice more since that first conversation, and each time the situation sounded more serious. Someone needed to help figure things out, and since Lisa was the older sister, everyone seemed to expect that someone to be her. The drive gave her too much time to think. When was the last time she'd really talked to her mom? Not just the quick, "Hi, how are you, everything's fine" calls, but actually sat down and had a real conversation. Lisa couldn't remember, and that realization sat heavy in her chest. She'd told Michael she'd be gone for a week, maybe 2 at most. Just long enough to get things sorted out, she'd said, as if family problems were just another project she could manage and complete. He'd nodded and kissed her goodbye, already distracted by his own work problems. Neither of them seemed to think this trip would change anything important. The town looked smaller than Lisa remembered, but in a cozy way rather than a disappointing one. Main Street still had the same coffee shop where she'd spent hours studying in high school, and the old movie theater was still showing films that had left the big cities months ago. Everything moved slower here, and for the first time in years, Lisa felt her shoulders relax just a little bit. Her childhood home sat at the end of a quiet street lined with oak trees. The house looked older now, with paint that needed touching up and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side, but the garden was still beautiful, full of flowers that her mom had been tending for decades. Lisa's sister, Amy, was waiting on that porch when she pulled up. Amy looked tired, older than her 31 years, but her smile was genuine when she saw Lisa getting out of the car. "You made good time," Amy said, giving her a hug that lasted longer than their usual quick greetings. "Traffic wasn't too bad," Lisa replied, though she could hear how formal she sounded even to herself. It was weird how quickly you could fall back into old patterns even after years away. They walked into the house together, and Lisa was hit by the smell of home. It was a mixture of her mom's favorite candles, old wood, and something she couldn't quite name but that made her feel like she was 12 years old again. The living room looked almost exactly the same, with the same floral couch and the same family photos covering every available surface. "Where's Mom?" Lisa asked, noticing the house was quieter than usual. "Taking a nap," Amy said, and something in her voice made Lisa look at her more carefully. "She gets tired easily these days. The doctor says it's normal, but—" Amy trailed off, shaking her head. They sat down in the kitchen and Amy made coffee while Lisa tried to process how strange it felt to be back. This room had been the heart of their family when they were growing up. Homework at the kitchen table, late-night conversations, holiday morning chaos. Now it felt almost too quiet. "So tell me what's really going on," Lisa said once they both had steaming mugs in front of them. Amy was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it might have answers. "It started small, you know. She'd forget where she put her keys, or she'd tell me the same story twice in one conversation. I figured it was just normal aging stuff." Lisa nodded, remembering similar moments during her brief visits home. "But then it got worse," Amy continued. "She got lost coming home from the grocery store last month. The store she's been shopping at for 20 years. A neighbor found her sitting in her car in the parking lot crying because she couldn't remember how to get home. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in Lisa's mouth. Why didn't you call me sooner? I tried to handle it, Amy said, and there was something defensive in her voice now. I took her to the doctor, got the test done, started researching care options. I figured you were busy with your important job and your important life. There it was, the resentment that Lisa had been sensing but trying to ignore. It hung between them like a wall, built up over years of Lisa being absent for the small, daily struggles while showing up for the big, photo-worthy moments. That's not fair, Lisa said. But even as the words came out, she knew Amy wasn't entirely wrong, isn't it? Amy stood up suddenly angry. When's the last time you visited for more than a weekend? When's the last time you called Mom just to chat, not because it was her birthday or a holiday? Lisa felt her own anger rising, that familiar need to defend herself and her choices. I've been building a career. I've been working toward something important. And I've been here, Amy shot back. I've been here for every doctor's appointment, every scared phone call, every day watching our mom slowly forget pieces of herself. While you were in your fancy apartment posting pictures of your perfect life. The words hit Lisa like a slap. She wanted to argue, to list all the ways she'd been a good daughter from a distance, the money she'd sent for home repairs, the gifts, the cards. But sitting in this kitchen, looking at the exhaustion on her sister's face, those things suddenly felt hollow. Before Lisa could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Their mom appeared in the doorway, looking smaller and more fragile than Lisa remembered. Her hair was messy from sleep, and she blinked at them with confusion. Amy? She said, looking right at Lisa. Who's this nice lady in our kitchen? The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's heart dropped into her stomach as she realized her own mother didn't recognize her. Amy's eyes filled with tears, and Lisa finally understood just how much had changed while she was busy building her perfect life. Lisa stayed in Oregon for 2 weeks instead of 1, then extended it to 3. Each day brought new challenges and revelations that made returning to her old life feel more and more impossible. She watched her mom have good days and bad days, learned about medications and care routines, and slowly began to understand the weight that Amy had been carrying alone. But life back in Seattle wouldn't pause indefinitely. Her phone buzzed constantly with work emails, missed calls from Michael, and texts from friends wondering where she'd disappeared to. The longer she stayed away, the more foreign her other life began to feel. When she finally returned to the city, everything looked exactly the same, but Lisa felt like a completely different person. Her apartment, once a source of pride, now felt cold and sterile. All those perfectly arranged objects suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the messy reality of family and illness and time. Running out, Michael was waiting for her with takeout from her favorite restaurant and a bottle of wine. He'd cleaned the apartment and bought flowers, clearly trying to make her homecoming special. But as they sat on her pristine white couch, eating pad thai from expensive containers, Lisa felt like she was watching her life from outside her body. So how bad is it really? Michael asked between bites. With your mom, I mean. Lisa tried to explain, but how do you describe watching your mother forget your name? How do you put into words the guilt of realizing you've missed years of small moments because you were chasing something you thought was more important? It sounds really hard, Michael said when she finished. But his tone was the same one he used for work problems. Sympathetic but distant, like he was already thinking about solutions and timelines. But at least now you know what you're dealing with. You can make a plan. Lisa almost laughed, but not in a good way. Everything couldn't be solved with better organization and strategic thinking, though for most of her adult life, she'd believed exactly that. Work was worse than she'd expected. 3 weeks away had felt like 3 months in corporate time. Projects had moved forward without her. Decisions had been made in meetings she wasn't part of. And her carefully maintained position as the indispensable employee had proven to be not so indispensable after all. Her boss, Janet, was understanding but practical. "We're glad you're back," she said during their catch-up meeting. "But we need to talk about the Peterson presentation. It's scheduled for next week, and frankly, we weren't sure if you'd be ready." The Peterson presentation, Lisa's biggest project of the year, the one that was supposed to secure her promotion and prove she belonged in the company's top tier. She'd been preparing for months before her trip, but now, sitting in the conference room looking at spreadsheets and market analysis, she couldn't remember why any of it had seemed so important. "I'll be ready," she heard herself say, because that's what the old Lisa would have said. But as the words came out, she felt something crack inside her chest. She threw herself into work with a desperation that surprised even her, staying late, coming in early, double-checking every detail until her eyes burned from staring at screens. But the harder she tried to slip back into her old rhythm, the more off balance she felt. The presentation day arrived like a storm she'd been watching approach but couldn't avoid. Lisa had prepared everything perfectly, as always. Her slides were flawless, her research was thorough, her outfit was professional and confident. She'd practiced her opening lines in the mirror that morning until they sounded natural. But when she stood up in front of the Peterson team and her own colleagues, something went wrong. Not with the presentation itself, which went smoothly enough, but with Lisa. She could hear herself talking, could see people nodding and taking notes, but she felt completely disconnected from her own words. Halfway through, while explaining market demographics, she suddenly thought about her mom trying to remember her name. While discussing profit margins, she remembered Amy's exhausted face and the way their childhood home had felt so much more real than this sterile conference room. And that's why we believe this campaign will resonate with our target audience, she concluded, but her voice sounded flat even to herself. The questions afterward were routine, the kind she'd answered 100 times before. But Lisa found herself struggling to focus, giving answers that were technically correct but lacked her usual passion and insight. She caught Janet's concerned look from across the table and knew she wasn't fooling anyone. Michael noticed the change too, though he approached it like he approached everything else, with logic and suggestions. "Maybe you should see someone," he said one evening as they sat in her living room, both on their phones despite being together. "A therapist or something, to help process what happened with your family." He meant well, Lisa knew that, but the way he said it, like therapy was just another item to check off a to-do list, made her realize how little he actually understood what she was going through. "Maybe," she said, but she was already pulling away from him emotionally, the same way she'd been pulling away from everything that used to matter to her. Sleep became even more elusive. She'd lie awake thinking about her mom's confused face, about Amy's resentment, about how artificial her relationship with Michael felt. Her perfectly organized life suddenly seemed like an elaborate performance that she was too tired to keep up. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine client meeting. Lisa was presenting quarterly results to a long-term client, something she'd done dozens of times before. But as she stood at the front of the room, looking at charts and graphs that represented months of work, her chest began to tighten, her breathing became shallow, her hands started shaking, and suddenly the room felt impossibly small. The faces staring back at her seemed to blur together, and she couldn't remember what she'd been saying or why she was standing there. "I'm sorry," she managed to say, though her voice sounded far away. "I need a moment." She walked out of the conference room on unsteady legs, leaving behind a room full of confused colleagues and clients. In the bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face and tried to breathe normally. But her heart was racing like she'd just run a marathon. Janet found her there 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall. "Lisa," Janet's voice was gentle, concerned. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Lisa whispered. And for the first time in years, that was completely true. She had no plan, no strategy, no way to organize herself out of this mess. She was just tired and scared and completely, utterly lost. That night, she called Amy from her empty apartment while Michael was at his own place. They talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, about childhood memories and current fears, about how sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready for it. "I think I messed everything up," Lisa admitted as the conversation wound down. "No," Amy said quietly. "I think you're just finally waking up." Lisa took medical leave from work, which felt both terrifying and oddly freeing. For the first time in her adult life, she had nowhere to be and nothing urgent to accomplish. The silence in her apartment was deafening at first, but slowly, she began to hear her own thoughts again. She started seeing Dr. Martinez, a therapist who didn't try to fix her with quick solutions or 5-step plans. Instead, Dr. Martinez asked questions that Lisa had never considered before. Questions like, what do you actually want? And when was the last time you felt truly happy? The answers didn't come easily. Lisa realized she'd been living someone else's idea of success for so long that she'd forgotten what her own dreams looked like. The promotion she'd been chasing, the perfect apartment, even her relationship with Michael, they all felt like items on a checklist she'd inherited rather than chosen. During one session, Dr. Martinez asked her to describe a perfect day without mentioning work, achievements, or other people's expectations. Lisa sat in silence for almost 10 minutes, genuinely struggling to imagine such a day. "I think," she finally said, "I'd want to sit in my mom's garden and listen to her tell stories about when I was little." Even if she told the same story 3 times, that's when it hit her. The life she'd been working so hard to build was keeping her away from the life she actually wanted to live. The decision didn't come like a lightning bolt. It grew slowly over weeks of therapy sessions, long phone calls with Amy, and quiet evenings in her apartment that no longer felt like home. Lisa found herself looking at plane tickets to Oregon more and more often, not for emergency visits, but just because that's where her heart kept pulling her. Michael tried to be supportive, but it was clear he didn't understand the changes happening in her. Their conversations became stilted and careful, like they were both walking on eggshells. When she tried to explain how she was feeling, he'd nod and suggest practical solutions that missed the point entirely. "Maybe you just need a vacation," he said one evening as they sat in her living room, both pretending to watch a movie neither was really interested in. "We could go somewhere nice."
Hawaii? Europe?
Lisa looked at him, this man she'd spent 4 years with, and realized they'd never really known each other at all. They'd been playing roles, successful couple, power pair, people who looked good together at work functions. But underneath all that performance, they were strangers. "I don't think a vacation is going to fix this," she said quietly. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. They talked about how they'd both been going through the motions, how their relationship had become comfortable but not truly intimate. Michael admitted he'd felt it too, but had hoped it would get better on its own. They ended things gently, with sadness but also with relief. Neither of them was the villain in their story. They'd just been 2 people trying to force something that didn't quite fit. With that weight lifted, Lisa felt clearer about what she needed to do. She started making lists, not the color-coded, perfectly organized lists of her old life, but messy, honest lists about what mattered to her. Family was at the top, real relationships, work that felt meaningful instead of just impressive. She called Amy more often, sometimes just to chat about random things. They talked about their mom's good days and bad days, about childhood memories, about the future they were all facing together. Slowly, the resentment between them began to heal. "I've been thinking," Lisa said during one of these calls, "about moving back home. Not permanently necessarily, but for a while." Amy was quiet for a long moment. "What about your job? Your life there?" "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "I'm still figuring it out. But I know I don't want to miss any more time with Mom. And I know I want to be there for you too. I should have been there all along." The idea took shape slowly. Lisa researched remote work options, looked into freelance consulting, and started imagining a life that wasn't built around impressive titles and perfect apartments. It was scary, giving up everything she'd worked for, but it also felt like waking up from a long dream. Then came the day that would change everything. Lisa had been in therapy for 6 weeks, had been planning her life changes carefully and methodically. But sometimes the most important moments happen without planning. She was packing up her apartment, deciding what to keep and what to give away, when she found herself looking at all the perfectly organized boxes of her perfectly organized life, her awards, her professional clothes, her expensive kitchen gadgets she'd never used, all the things that were supposed to prove she was successful. On impulse, she loaded everything into her car. Not just a suitcase for a visit, but boxes and bags full of the life she was choosing to leave behind. She didn't call ahead, didn't make a plan. She just drove. The 6-hour drive to Oregon felt like the longest and shortest journey of her life. With every mile, she felt lighter. With every mile, she felt more like herself. Amy's apartment was in a small complex near downtown, nothing fancy but warm and lived in. When Lisa pulled up, she could see her sister through the window, cooking dinner and laughing at something on TV. It looked so normal, so peaceful, so real. Lisa sat in her car for a moment, looking at all the boxes in her back seat. Her old life packaged up and ready to be left behind. Then she got out, gathered as much as she could carry, and walked to Amy's door. When Amy opened the door, Lisa was standing there with her arms full of boxes, bags hanging from her shoulders, looking completely ridiculous and completely overwhelmed. For a second, Amy just stared in shock, then Lisa smiled. Not the careful, professional smile she'd perfected over the years, but a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside her, the smile of someone who'd finally stopped pretending and started living. "I'm sorry," Lisa said, and then she started laughing because it felt so good to finally mean it. "I'm sorry for everything. And I'm here now if you'll have me." She let all the boxes and bags fall right there on Amy's doorstep and kept smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. Amy stared at Lisa for what felt like forever, taking in the sight of her sister surrounded by scattered belongings and wearing the biggest, most genuine smile she'd seen in years. Then Amy started laughing too, and before they knew it, they were both sitting on the doorstep, surrounded by boxes, crying and laughing at the same time. "You're completely crazy," Amy said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "You know that, right?" "Yeah," Lisa replied, looking at the mess she'd made. "I'm starting to figure that out." They spent that first evening talking until 3 in the morning, the way they used to when they were teenagers. Lisa explained everything: the panic attack, the therapy, the slow realization that her perfect life was actually pretty empty. Amy talked about the loneliness she'd felt, carrying everything alone, and how scared she'd been about their mom's diagnosis. "I was so angry at you," Amy admitted as they sat on her small couch, sharing a pint of ice cream. "But I also missed you every single day." "I missed you too," Lisa said. "I just didn't let myself feel it." Moving back home wasn't as simple as dropping boxes on a doorstep, of course. Lisa had to figure out the practical stuff: breaking her lease, selling furniture, explaining to everyone back in Seattle why she was walking away from everything they thought she wanted. Some people understood, but others looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Her former boss, Janet, was surprisingly supportive when Lisa called to officially resign. "I could see you were struggling," Janet said. "And honestly, after what happened in that meeting, I was worried about you. Sometimes we need to step back and remember what really matters." Lisa found a small apartment near Amy. Nothing fancy, but bright and comfortable. For the first time in years, she decorated based on what she actually liked instead of what looked impressive. Mismatched furniture, plants everywhere, photos of family and friends instead of abstract art. It felt like home in a way her expensive Seattle apartment never had. The work situation took longer to figure out. Lisa had saved enough money to take some time, but eventually she'd need income. She started freelance consulting, working with small businesses instead of big corporations. The pay was less, but the work felt more meaningful. She was helping local companies grow, working with people she could actually get to know instead of being just another face in conference calls. Best of all, she could work from anywhere, which meant she could spend real time with her mom. Their mom, Helen, was having more bad days than good ones now, but the good days were precious. Lisa learned to treasure the moments when her mom's eyes would light up with recognition, when they could have real conversations about the past or present. She also learned to find peace in the confused moments, when her mom might not know who she was but still seemed happy to have company. Lisa started a project that became incredibly important to her. She began recording her mom's stories, the ones Helen could still remember, about their family history, about Lisa and Amy's childhood, about her own parents and grandparents. Some days Helen would ramble for hours about her wedding day, or the time Lisa got lost at the county fair when she was 5. Lisa captured all of it. "Why are you doing this?" Amy asked one afternoon as Lisa set up her little recording equipment in their mom's living room. "Because these stories matter," Lisa said, "and because I want to remember her the way she really was, not just the way she is now." The recordings became a family treasure. Even on Helen's worst days, they could play back her voice telling funny stories or sharing old family recipes. It was like having pieces of her real self preserved, ready to bring out whenever they needed to remember who she used to be. Lisa's social life changed completely too. In Seattle, her friendships had been based mostly on work and networking. Here she made friends with her neighbors, with other people caring for aging parents, with the regulars at the coffee shop downtown. These relationships felt different, more honest, less performative. She even started dating again, though very casually. There was David, who ran the local bookstore and made her laugh with his terrible jokes about bestseller lists. There was nothing dramatic or passionate about it, but there was something better. It was real. They liked each other for who they actually were, not for the impressive lives they'd built. "You seem happier," David told her one evening as they walked through the downtown area after dinner. "Like genuinely happy, not just okay." Lisa thought about that. "I think I finally stopped trying to be someone else's idea of successful." The biggest test came when Helen's condition took a turn for the worse. There were hospital visits, difficult conversations with doctors, and the heartbreaking process of making end-of-life decisions. But this time Lisa was there for all of it. She held her mom's hand during the scary moments and celebrated the small victories together with Amy. They made the decision to bring Helen home for her final weeks, with help from hospice nurses and home care workers. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Helen spent her last days in the house where she'd raised her daughters, surrounded by familiar things and people who loved her. Lisa was holding her mom's hand when she died peacefully one Tuesday morning in spring. It was sad and beautiful at the same time, and Lisa felt grateful that she'd been there for this final chapter, instead of getting updates through phone calls from far away. The funeral was small, but meaningful. People from their mom's church, neighbors who'd known the family for decades, Lisa's new friends, and Amy's longtime partner, who'd been part of their family for years. As Lisa gave the eulogy, she talked about second chances and the importance of being present for the people we love. After Helen's death, Lisa and Amy had to figure out what came next. They decided to keep the family house, turning it into a place they could both visit whenever they needed to feel close to their mom's memory. Lisa stayed in her apartment, but she spent weekends at the house, tending to Helen's garden and maintaining the place where they'd all been happiest. 6 months later, Lisa was sitting in that garden on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise when she heard a car pull up in the driveway. It was her old college roommate Rachel, who'd driven down from Portland for a surprise visit. "I hope you don't mind me just showing up," Rachel said as Lisa opened the front door. "I know it's been a tough year and I wanted to see how you were doing." Lisa smiled, that same genuine smile that had started this whole journey, and gestured for Rachel to come in. "I don't mind at all. Actually, I'm kind of getting used to unexpected visitors." As they sat in the kitchen catching up, Rachel marveled at how different Lisa seemed. "You look like yourself again," she said. "I mean, I know that sounds weird, but in Seattle you always seemed like you were performing, you know? Like you were playing a part." "I was," Lisa admitted. "I just didn't realize it at the time." Later that afternoon, as Rachel was getting ready to leave, she paused at the front door. "I'm proud of you," she said. "It takes guts to completely change your life like this." "Thanks," Lisa said. "But honestly, I didn't really change my life. I just finally started living it." After Rachel left, Lisa stood in her doorway for a moment, looking out at the quiet street where she'd grown up. Her life looked nothing like what she'd planned 10 years ago, but it felt completely right. She'd traded the impressive apartment for a simple home, the high-powered job for meaningful work, the perfect relationship for real connections, and for the first time in her adult life, when someone knocked on her door unexpectedly, she opened it with a genuine smile, ready for whatever came next.